Light Initiative, and welcome to our mindfulness interview series, where we're speaking with professionals and community members involved in mental health work to highlight the wide-reaching impacts and benefits of mindfulness and the importance of mental health care. Today, we're welcoming Dr. Rochelle Calvert, PhD, CMT, SEP, licensed clinical psychologist, certified mindfulness teacher, and somatic experiencing practitioner. She has devoted a love to share the power and healing potential of mindfulness, somatic awareness, and nature. She has studied and taught mindfulness for the past 23 years and knows personally the transformational potential. Dr. Calvert leads courses and retreats in mindfulness. She also facilitates professional trainings and travels the country teaching retreats and seminars. She's the director of the Ecotherapy program at Southwestern College and New Earth Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She is a certified mindfulness teacher with the Mindfulness Teaching Institute, the International Mindfulness Teachers Association, and Awake in the Wild organization. Dr. Calvert now lives in Taos, New Mexico, and has a private practice in both Taos, New Mexico, and San Diego, California. She enjoys spending her free time in nature, hiking, practicing yoga, and exploring indigenous heritage, and resting with the trees. She practices mindfulness-based meditation rooted in the Buddhist Theravada tradition and practices meditation outside in nature daily. Thank you so much, Dr. Calvert, for being here today. It means a lot to all of us, and we're so excited to be learning from your expertise today.
Thanks for inviting me, Shreya.
Okay, lovely. How about with that, we'll just jump straight into the first question. And so I figured we should probably start by defining just what exactly mindfulness is, because it's truly a different process for every person and how they're implementing it into their daily life. And there's no true hard definition. So, Dr. Calvert, how do you define mindfulness and practice it and see it in your life?
Mm. Yeah, so I think the first offering of the definition I would give comes with the knowledge that in these 23 years I've been practicing, it's a constant practice for me to be in a relationship to the evolving definition of it. So, what I share with you today isn't what I would have shared with you 15 years ago, right? It's as you just named, as we practice, as we come into a direct experience of a relationship with what mindfulness is, it actually begins to inform the how or in what ways we define what mindfulness actually is, because there's such a large body of teachings pointing us to what it is. But at the moment where I reside with the relationship to that understanding is it's a clear and kind awareness to our inner and outer experiences. Meaning, if we're clear, we're truly seeing how it is, we're kindly meeting what's here, and we recognize that there's no way at any moment that there's not an inner and an outer sense of life happening. The sense of feeling all of that is in the present moment where I see mindfulness is.
100%. I love how you highlighted that it's really a journey, that it evolves as you practice mindfulness. And I think that's a really critical part of, starting mindfulness and then allowing it to take you where um, you're going. And I think a lot of people don't realize that like that sense of journey is very fulfilling and really makes mindfulness so special.
Yeah.
And I guess a part of that journey, what drew you to mindfulness practice initially and motivated you to continue sharing that with others?
Yeah. So, the funny story to my journey is that I like to say mindfulness found me in a Las Vegas hotel conference room, which is a very strange place to have mindfulness show up in one's life. But I was in the development of my psychological career early on and study of graduate work and attended a conference in the middle of this hotel room in Las Vegas and heard this definition. And at that time, it was just blooming onto the scene with psychology. I mean, we're talking, 25, 30 years ago now. But that it was just beginning to be of interest to study. And I remember hearing the definition at that time that was shared with me, having one small practice that was maybe no more than 3 or 5 minutes. And I left that moment and that experience of that conference with, I need to learn more. And so that kind of started the journey. And it started my journey into my PhD studies and then has continued through my entire career. But I would say that much like you just named, it is a journey. As you keep practicing it, it illuminates different ways you want to understand yourself and life. And so that itself is important to listen to as you're in your journey with mindfulness. So like if practicing outside feels really alive for you, follow that. If you're practicing mindfulness with understanding the heart more or understanding the mind more, follow that. It really has over the years for me been that's awakening within me, so I follow more of that.
That's very cool. I mean, I love that it came to you in the most like unconventional ways, but you've taken it and you've grown so much. And again, like you're sharing with a lot of people through your seminars and um your like organization and your camp and your practice. So actually kind of building on that, as you mentioned, like, it's going to be different for every person. Like if you feel more alive in nature, that's kind of mindfulness that, might work best for you. And of course, there are many different types of mindfulness practice. And you mentioned that your meditation is rooted mostly in primarily in Buddhist beliefs. But I guess could you speak to maybe the different types of mindfulness and then like from your very beginning, like journey in Las Vegas all the way to now, why you kind of
Yeah.
like focused on nature-based meditation?
Mm. Yeah. So when I began to follow the teachings of mindfulness, it really was from a Western psychology lens to begin with. And we had some seminal people at that time, like Jack Kornfield, who had just written The Wise Heart, which was a psychological understanding of traditional Buddhist texts. And so I began to study that and got very interested in how the intersection of psychological well being and these practices could support our healing, like ripen us into more wholesome states so we weren't suffering so much with different mental health conditions. As that progressed, though, what I kept running into, and again, this was as the field of mindfulness and psychology was evolving, I was butting up against how it could really support folks well with trauma. I kept finding that we'd get somewhere, but not fully. Like there just wasn't enough. And so I took the route of going into actually a deeper dive into the traditional studies. So outside of just the Western psychological understanding of it and into more traditional understanding. And as I went that route, that was really helpful. But what that began to illuminate was I like to practice outside. I met some teachers that were practicing outside more traditionally. And I thought, well, that's useful. That's helpful for me. And it was helping my practice ripen. And then I thought, well, I'll start figuring out how to bring some of that into this, way that I was offering it with individuals. And then I had a very important client in my life present who wanted some support with mindfulness practice to manage for her anxiety. But it became clear to me after a few sessions she was struggling with significant trauma that was impacting why she was so anxious. And she had experienced trauma associated with traumas occurring during meditation states. So it became very clear to me meditation was not the direction to go, or mindfulness was not necessarily going to be the most wholesome way to support her. And that's what brought in the discovery of somatic experiencing. I really began to see how body based trauma healing practices would be really beneficial to support trauma, but also being in nature would really support people to heal trauma. And the Buddha talks about in the traditional foundations of mindfulness, the very first one, he tells us to focus on the body. There's all kinds of texts and teachings on this. So that wedding of that traditional understanding of that with this somatic, meaning body informed trauma healing approach, and taking all of that out to be outside and be supported is how at present I practice. It's the integration of all of that with clients at this time and in retreats and seminars.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. Definitely makes sense. I think a lot of people like who are trying to like introduce themselves to mindfulness practice think about it as like a spiritual health, a mental health focus. And yes, that's very important, but a lot of times that physical aspect is not recognized as much. That connection is definitely there, and somatic practice definitely makes that bridge um very tangible and very real. And it kind of puts together all parts of your body, your mental health, your physical health, and your well-being really comes together. So,
Yeah, and I'll just share there's growing research to suggest that body-based practices, including in the tradition of mindfulness, those have been underdeveloped in our immediate Western approach to thinking how mindfulness should go. And so, really, I would say, like in the last 5 to 7 years, you're seeing more of an emphasis on body based mindfulness practices to support us bringing online, like you said, that integration of the whole of the body and the mind.
100%. Well, now that we've, I guess, kind of spoken a lot about the benefits of mindfulness, the different types, things like that, I guess, how do you recommend that youth integrate it into their everyday lives in a tangible way? Because a lot of times, for me at least, I felt that it was my motivation for getting into mindfulness was when I felt that I needed extra support for my mental health. But a lot of times, mindfulness can be beneficial even before your mental health gets to extremes. So how do you recommend that, youth kind of take the initiative to be able to integrate it into their everyday lives?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons for myself personally, and then with the work that I've shared with clients, has gone outside is because it's easier to practice these practices outside, is what I find. Meaning, when you and I sit in our regular place like we're in right now, we like have all these automatic conditions of like, there's my work papers, there's the thing, you know, we're just kind of conditioned in this way when we're in our familiar environments that, well, yes, we can practice mindfulness there. It just might be a little harder because those automatic behaviors and patterns are there. When you step outside and you get away from all that, you're immediately allured into presence because of the natural world. Like, it's as simple as if I look outside right now, there's snow on the ground and the sun is shining on the ground, and I put my attention out there for just a second, immediately I'm present with the white and the glitter and the reflection and then the space of the trees and then the expanse of the sky. There's no effort in that. It's just a kind of natural process in which to become present. And so if we're talking about daily life, it's take a moment outside and maybe just let your senses allure you, because that will probably bring some sense of presence and begin that development or that growth of the mindfulness awareness sense of presence.
I absolutely loved how you framed that, like taking that distinction of, being able to go outside, having that openness around you. It's thinking outside of the box, but in the most literal sense. Take yourself outside of those four walls. And and
Yeah,
yes, I,
yeah.
I definitely agree with what you're saying.
And it's so simple, right? Maybe people have heard about mindfulness of the breath, or mindfulness of hearing, or mindfulness of seeing, or mindfulness of the body. When you step outside, all of that goes, it's just so right there. You can, especially if it's like cold air, which it is right here now here, you can feel your breath like that. And so it can be yeah, more easeful. And I find, and what I think people would report finding is it's more nourishing in a way because we're actually designed, our animal nature, this body being, is designed to be in relationship with the outside world. And these days, a lot of us, most of us, don't get enough time out there. So when I often tell people when you're practicing mindfulness outside, you're getting like a twofer because you're learning how to practice mindfulness and you're getting the benefit of a dose of being outside, which is really good for our mental health as well.
Yes, 100%. Being outside, it brings all those senses together right here in your heart. And that's a beautiful, refreshing feeling.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I guess, building on that initial question about like how to best integrate mindfulness into your everyday lives. For like youth, do you recommend doing it in a group setting with their
Mm,
parents, with their own, with their friends?
yeah.
How would you recommend like to measure that progress over time? Because like New Year's resolution, it's really easy to set them, but it's not easy to keep them going. So
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah.
recommend to measure that progress?
I saw that question, Shreya, and I really appreciated it because it made me really reflect on how would I and what would I reflect on that for youth specifically. And I think there's two things that come to mind around that for me. Is one, I think it's more and more important in this current culture and climate of concern that we're in that we practice together. And often another benefit when we're practicing outside and we feel the connection to nature, we don't feel as alone either because we're with nature and there's aliveness out there and it's easier from that perspective too. But I think when we're growing a practice, it's profoundly beneficial to have a way to practice with community, even if you're going outside. A lot of times I invite people to develop what's called a sit spot outside. You go to a place again and again. Maybe it's just your patio. Maybe it's a place in a park that you know well that's close to you. And you go to that place again and again and again to practice. Even if you can't go with your friends, that might be an extra bonus to bring them to the sit spot. But the sit spot becomes the friend community because you're with the same beings again and again and again outside, and the community that you're a part of as well as you're outside. So I think the part I would underscore in the development of one's practice, specifically for youth now and the times that we're in, I think that aspect of nurturing practice with community, whether that's a nature community or that's your human community or more than human community, all of those communities being a part of your practice, it actually benefits the sustainability and I would say the well-being of one's practice to practice well.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I really like that idea that you mentioned, like whenever you're outside, like life is always surrounding you. You always have that sense of community. And to be able to go to the same spot, that same community, that same liveliness every day and create that association, I think is
Right.
so important to create that consistency. Um, so that you have that sense of like belonging in that place when
Mm-hmm.
you're practicing mindfulness.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely love that.
And
And
we're
that's
finding that research actually on belonging and reciprocity is extraordinarily healing for our mental health. And it can buoy us through great difficulties. So if we establish that through our practice, it can be really supportive.
for sure.
Mhm.
Kind of returning back a little bit to the work that you're doing, I wanted to ask you about the book that you wrote. Um, kind of like what is it about? Like what are the age groups that you'd recommend reading it? And what inspired you to write it in the first place?
I'll answer that first. Well, it was definitely the intersection of, like I was pointing to earlier, all these different things coming together and recognizing we needed a more intentional or skillful way to hold how do we turn towards trauma. So the book being Healing with Nature, Mindfulness and Somatic Practices to Heal from Trauma. But I also like to say that the earth also wrote that book because I'd spent so much time outside practicing, developing relationship, developing deep listening. And part of what lives inside that book is that relationship, that understanding, and sharing that with people so that they can take it on as a practice for themselves. And as far as who the book is meant for, it's meant for everyone. I wrote it as both something that someone who just wants to learn how to personally practice, they could pick it up and practice. But I also wrote it for those who are leaning themselves into the mental health profession, could also pick it up and begin to look at it from a personal and professional standpoint. And the book is basically written in 4 sections. we're first developing mindfulness with nature. Then we're developing an understanding of somatic healing with nature, what it means to really wake up to the body and turn to trauma with healing. The next section being, what are all the beautiful, healthy, wholesome, alive states that start to come through from practicing that? And then the last section of the book is, so if we've experienced a taste of what it means or feels like to have nature heal trauma, how do we act in reciprocity to heal the trauma of the earth from that place? Meaning, likely if we've been touched, and this is what I find is so easy for people, once they've felt the benefit of their own well-being supported by the natural world, the heart's impulse to say, well, I care about the earth and let me help in this way, it's just there's no effort in it. And so that last section of the book points to ways we might reflect or contemplate on how to do that.
That's really awesome. I think that correct me if I'm wrong, but I definitely recommend anybody who's watching this interview right now to, look online because it is available for purchase. And I think that like you said, like the way that the book is divided into four parts, it facilitates that journey that we were talking about in the beginning to be able to, integrate mindfulness practice for yourself and then to also again create that sense of community with the natural world. And that this book it helps really facilitate that introspection and that process. So I highly recommend it to anybody who is interested in developing their own mindfulness care. And as you said, it's universal. So I think that is um it's very accessible and it's an amazing book. So definitely recommend for anybody who is interested to go ahead and look at it. Well, I have just a couple more questions.
Okay.
I first wanted to ask, do you like you've worked with, I guess, a lot of people who are developing their personal mindfulness practice, and it's not necessarily an easy thing. Like you will have roadblocks, obstacles. What
Mm,
are some obstacles that people typically face when trying to, develop their personal practice?
mm.
And do you have any recommendations for how these can be overcome?
Yeah. I think there are two most common ones that I get reflected. One is consistency. How do I remain consistent? And then the second is it's not comfortable, so how do I continue when I practice? So on the first one, um, it's much like I was pointing to earlier. If you decide to practice outside, or even if you decide not to, if you have a sit spot or what we might call a sacred spot that you go to, that you know this is your place to practice, it's protected. It holds all the things that you would need to practice, meaning your cushion or your, you know, important things that remind you why you would take care of yourself like this. Creating a place to practice is so incredibly important as to how to answer the consistency question. Because if you have a place and if it's in your house and you look at it every day, the high probability that you get there more often is increased just because you've created the place. And inside that place, having support that supports you to practice is really important. So having recordings. Don't worry, yes, it's great to, as we grow in our practice, to develop how to practice on our own without the guidance. But people leading practices is a way you have support to have less effort in the practice. And that also is a variable for consistency. If it's not so hard from that perspective, you're more likely to go there. So the place, the support for guidance, and then this last piece of people will share, it's hard. This wasn't a good practice, right? I didn't get to the thing I wanted, which was more calm or more peace. And I started and I left the same way I began. That's a good practice. It's a very good practice. This is the re-relating to our experience that mindfulness is trying to help us know. When you sit with discomfort, even if it's for the whole of your entire 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and that's a good instruction. Start small, build up in practice. But that ability to sit in the discomfort and keep meeting it with clear and kind presence it transforms your relationship to how you meet difficulty. And at the essence of one of the fundamental teachings of this practice, it is that. It is how can I meet? There will be suffering in my life. But how can I be with it in such a way that I form a caring and kind and clear relationship to it so that it doesn't create reactivity or more struggle or more suffering in my life. So it's a good practice when we sit. And it's difficult, which is really hard for the mind to get on board with. It's like, what do you mean by that? But at the end of the day, it truly is one of the beautiful outgrowths of the development of a mindfulness practice.
100%. I mean, I feel like in a world that's always moving so fast,
Mm,
it's natural to want like results immediately. Like you sit down and you want to feel calmer right after, but
yeah.
that's not necessarily something that happens because you need to realize that that process of sitting down itself was a good practice. Like you said, like there's no such thing as a bad practice.
That's
If
right.
you're sitting down, you're taking the time to do this, you're taking initiative for your personal care, and that in of itself is a good practice.
It's a
So
good practice. And it will have ripe benefits down the line. And it's so
yes.
good that you're naming this isn't a practice where we get often when we begin to see the immediate fruit.
Mhm.
It usually takes a dedication of just a couple months. And I know that might seem like a long time, but if you can get consistent with even just 5 minutes a day for 2 months, you will see that accumulated benefit and it will have that impact in a more um, integrated way. The last thing I'll say about I always, when I have taught folks who are new to meditation, there was research done very early on that says if you're willing to commit to the practice and you sustain it over a period of time, like I was just naming, the good news is the benefit you get from that sustained, let's say it's 2 months, that never goes away. So even if you stepped away from your practice for a month or two, that experience of the shift in your literal brain and in your nervous system does not stop. And so the good news is it's like a stick to itiveness. Like so if you even if it's a hard practice and you go, you can be assured it's in there. It's not going to leave. So even if you struggle to keep consistency, it's in there. So
Which is why it's so important to like even if you do it once, even if you do it
that's right.
twice, that, it
That's
makes
right.
a difference.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Calvert, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your advice, and I really hope to everybody who's going to be watching this that you take away something important from this, whether it is, starting your own practice or continuing what you're already doing, or picking up Dr. Calvert's book to get started. I hope that this has been meaningful to everybody who is watching. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Calvert, for sharing your insight and expertise with us.
Thank you, Shay, and thank you for carrying good work into the world to help people know about mindfulness.